Heavy rain had fallen on Dunsleigh for days, leaving the streets glistening with puddles. The old stone drains along Fernmere Lane gurgled with runoff. One morning, something unusual caught the attention of the neighbors. Fern, a timid tabby who typically avoided human interaction, sat motionless by a storm drain. Hours went by, and an uneasy feeling settled over the small crowd that had gathered. Finally, with effort, they pried open the heavy lid. Inside, they discovered 5 tiny, soaked kittens, curled up and desperately clinging to warmth. As I knelt beside the drain, an overwhelming sensation started to build within me. It became clear that Fern was not just protecting her little ones. She was reaching out, signaling for help in a way I never expected. In that moment, everything else faded. The rain, the chatter of onlookers, and the noisy world around me. I focused only on the scene before me. These fragile little bodies, tangled together like petals in a withered flower. Their eyes were barely open, and their fur was slick with water. My instinct screamed to get them out, but the drain was deep, and my arms couldn't quite reach. Fern paced anxiously behind me, emitting short, distressed meows. Unlike her usual responses, she seemed to understand that we were there to help. I called Jasper for assistance. He had always been quicker in these situations. Within minutes he arrived, soaked through but determined. He carefully slid onto his stomach and began to scoop the kittens out one by one. Pip, the littlest, barely stirred, while Tansy hissed even in her state of distress. Moss, Clove, and Bramble were shivering but alive. We bundled them in Jasper's hoodie. I noticed how his hands trembled as he cradled them. Moira soon arrived with towels and a thermos filled with warm water. Without a word, she knelt beside Fern, gazing into her eyes. "You clever girl," she whispered, acknowledging the mother's quiet bravery. That evening, I took the kittens home. I set up blankets in a laundry basket, turned on a space heater, and spent hours by their side. I had no experience caring for animals, and I honestly hadn't thought much about cats before this day. Yet something about the way Fern had watched and waited made it impossible for me to turn away. The following days turned chaotic in the best possible way. Pip struggled to eat, and I found myself using a syringe to feed him kitten formula every few hours. Tansy tried to hide beneath the furniture, while Bramble and Moss stayed closely bonded like twins. Clove showed her adventurous spirit by attempting to escape the basket on the second day. Meanwhile, Fern remained outside, determinedly watching over us from her post by the kitchen window. The night was growing darker, rain pounding against the windows as I dozed on the couch. I jolted awake to a strange thud coming from the laundry room. It didn't sound right, and my heart raced as I rushed in to investigate. There, I found Tansy. She was convulsing, her tiny body shaking and foaming at the mouth. Panic settled over me, and I quickly wrapped her in a towel, calling Moira for help. Her calm voice was a lifeline. "She needs a vet. Now." I sprinted to the clinic, ignoring all the traffic signals. The vet took her in right away, but when he emerged, I saw in his face that something was seriously wrong. He asked me about the other kittens, whether they were lethargic or had lost their appetite. The dread in my stomach deepened as I recounted their symptoms. Pip was still weak, and Bramble and Moss had barely moved all day. That's when I learned the truth. The kittens had toxoplasmosis, likely acquired from untreated exposure. The vet explained how, in the wild, it often proved fatal without intervention. I left the clinic with a heavy heart, Tansy still under their care, and the other 4 kittens bundled beside me, completely unaware of the dark cloud hovering over them. My thoughts drifted back to Fern, the mother cat who had once appeared at our door. I remembered how I left food out for her and tried to create a safe space in the shed, yet she never got close to the kittens. It was as if her mission had ended with the search for help, not a stay. I wondered if she knew what was ahead before she vanished one night. There were no paw prints left in the mud, no signs she had even been there. As I returned home empty-handed, a wave of despair washed over me. The house felt so quiet. It was late, and the rain kept falling as I struggled to sleep, wrestling with the weight of what lay ahead. Moira had raised practical questions earlier, asking whether I intended to keep all 5 kittens. But at that moment, I was grappling with something much larger than mere logistics. Someone had suggested reaching out to a shelter. They had the experience and the resources, but the thought of giving them up felt wrong. It felt too soon, too impersonal. How could I hand them over when they were so fragile? It struck me then that this situation wasn't just about rescuing the kittens, it was the beginning of a far more complex journey. As dawn approached, I was still awake, restless, and worried about what was to come. The day began with a slow sense of dread. Outside, the rain hammered against the roof, becoming a relentless drum roll that echoed through the house. Inside was a different story, one filled with a tense quiet. Every sound felt magnified, especially the soft breaths of the kittens. I could feel the fragility of the moment, as Pip whimpered softly in his dreams beneath my old wool scarf, while Clove nuzzled closer to my arm, as if looking for comfort that wasn't there. I sat against the wall, eyes fixed on the darkened window, hoping to catch any sign that Fern had returned. But the world outside remained shrouded in shadows and cold. When the morning light finally broke, I reached for Jasper. He arrived silently, soaked through, his jacket hood sagging heavily. Rather than ask about Fern, he moved directly to the basket. Kneeling down, he extended a trembling hand toward Bramble, who gratefully crawled into his lap. In that moment, I saw tears fall from his eyes. Quiet, unvoiced sorrow. They dripped onto the kitten, and I respected his silence. This was a moment that transcended the urgency of our task. It had become a shared weight, a responsibility neither of us had sought but couldn't abandon. Moira entered a short while later, moving with a certain heaviness. She held a small plastic bag of emergency medicine given to her by the vet. Taking in the scene, the damp towels, the makeshift heat lamps, the scattered bottles, she finally spoke, her tone almost reverent. "You two need to think carefully about what you're willing to take on, because it won't end with these 5 kittens." As the week progressed, the kittens transformed the rhythm of my life. Everything revolved around their care: scheduled feedings, warm compresses, and late-night checks to ensure their little bodies were breathing steadily. Yet changes weren't confined just to our home. News about the rescue spread through Dunsleigh quicker than I anticipated. One morning, I found an anonymous note wedged in the doorframe. It read, "You're not trained, you're not equipped. These animals need proper care, not sympathy." The words felt cold, lingering in my mind like a shroud. Later that same day, I noticed 2 council workers near the drain where Fern had once waited. They were discussing plans to seal it for good, citing safety concerns and sanitation policies. It was a small interaction, but it connected back to everything we were facing. The weight of responsibility seemed to shift and grow as the journey unfolded before us. It was just past midnight when a faint sound pulled me from the couch. Cautiously, I opened the back door, feeling the cold air rush in like an unwelcome guest. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground. The rain had finally stopped, yet a strange heaviness lingered in the night, making it seem as if something was watching. Then, I spotted them, small, muddy paw prints leading across the back path. They weren't fresh, but also hadn't completely faded. They were too small to belong to Fern. Earlier that day, Moira had shared some news that stirred up feelings inside me. A larger shelter in Inverness had called her, eager to help, offering space and resources. In theory, it sounded like the perfect solution. Safer, cleaner, and smarter. Yet the thought of handing over the kittens to strangers weighed heavily on my mind. It wasn't distrust. It was the fear that they weren't ready to become just another case. Not after all we had faced together. As I stood in the doorway of the spare room, I looked at the 5 tiny bodies curled up together, breathing softly. They resembled a patchwork quilt of fur, brought to life by the gentle warmth of the heater. But the peace around them contrasted sharply with the turmoil churning within me. Each day brought new doubts and fears I couldn't shake off. They were growing stronger, yet I felt myself unraveling. Nights stretched endlessly, mornings rushed in too quickly, and I began avoiding mirrors. I didn't want to see the toll this quiet devotion was taking on me. It was a mix of pure exhaustion and a deep-seated fear of making the wrong choice, of not knowing when to let go. Jasper had been asking questions too, lingering thoughts hanging in the air even after he left. What if they never get adopted? He wondered aloud. What if one of them dies anyway? He never outright asked if I planned to keep them, but the tension was palpable. Could I truly give them away? Could I trust someone else to care for them as we had? Moira's words echoed at the back of my mind. You have to love them enough to let them go, or love them enough to stay. The truth was, I didn't know which path I could take. With each paw print leading away from me, I felt a mix of hope and concern. Whatever was happening out there, I knew one thing for sure. I needed to confront both my fears and the possibility of change. The day Pip vanished, the silence in the house became almost palpable. A sense of something fundamental had shifted, leaving an unsettling emptiness in its wake. I remember how I searched everywhere, every drawer, each cupboard, and the hidden corners beneath the furniture. I had done everything to make the house safe for the kittens, ensuring windows were tight and screens intact, so his disappearance made little sense to me. There were no signs of forced entry, just a neglected vent cover on the floor with rusted screws scattered around it. I knelt beside it, my heart racing, whispering his name like a secret prayer. As time passed, the remaining kittens felt Pip's absence acutely. Clove wandered nervously around the laundry basket, desperately looking for a way out. Bramble, on the other hand, seemed glued to moss, barely moving. Then there was Tansy, who had just started to heal from her earlier illness. Her sorrowful meows echoed through the house, a haunting call for Pip that hollowed my heart a bit more each time I heard it. Jasper began visiting more frequently after that. He would bring sketchbooks filled with drawings of the kittens, Pip curled up sweetly, Clove mid-leap, and Tansy in her graceful stretch. Though his words about the missing vent cover were few, he took to inspecting every window and screen upon arrival. It was clear that his recent loss had unearthed a protective instinct within him, something deeper than his years that began to shape the way he moved through our grief. Meanwhile, Moira became quieter and more observant. One afternoon, she lingered at the kitchen table after the kittens had eaten, tracing her finger along her mug as she gazed out at the world beyond the window. You know they imprint on moments, not just people, she remarked thoughtfully. That's why they remember storms, smells, voices, loss. Her calm voice held a profound weight, carrying the memories just below the surface. In that stillness, we all felt Pip's absence. Each day, we searched not just for him, but for a way to mend the fragile rhythm of our lives that had been so abruptly disrupted. In the stillness of a late afternoon, golden light poured through the windows while the kittens napped in a tangled, purring heap. Jasper stood in the kitchen, arms crossed and his well-loved sketchbook tucked under his arm, its edges curled and marked with graphite smudges. "You're not going to call them, are you?" he asked softly. There was no accusation in his voice, just a quiet certainty, as if he already knew the answer, but needed to hear it spoken. The pressure of our situation had been building silently over the past weeks. Even when the air was calm, an unspoken heaviness lingered. I could feel it, especially after Jasper began to ask more direct questions. "So, are they staying?" he wondered one evening, his eyes fixed on the kittens as they wrestled playfully across the folded blankets. "Or are we giving them up?" I hesitated to answer, my gaze drifting to Tansy, full of energy and now strong, wrestling with Bramble while Moss looked on from the safety of the heater's glow. Their spirits had blossomed, and they had become so attached to us. They followed me from room to room, curling up in my lap as if that was their rightful place. In many ways, it felt like I was starting to belong to them too. The voice of my friend Moira echoed in my mind, "Love them enough to stay, or enough to let them go." Those words had once sounded beautiful. Now they cut deeply. A call from the Inverness shelter had come again, this time with an invitation to pick up the kittens that weekend. They mentioned they had found foster homes that were safe and ready for them, and it should have brought relief. Instead, a hollowness settled heavily in my chest. That evening, I found myself sitting outside by the old storm drain, where Fern's paw prints had long since dried in the sun. The silence wrapped around me, carrying the weight of untold memories. I whispered her name into the quiet night, not really expecting a response. As I sat there, a thought began to surface. Was the decision looming ahead about what was best for the kittens, or was it more about what I was afraid to lose by letting them go? It was a feeling I had struggled to articulate. Now, as I recalled those moments with the kittens, filled with joy and connection, I understood that my choice wasn't going to be easy, and so the internal struggle continued. I wanted to tell Jasper the truth. I didn't know what to do. The house was filled with a quiet tension, not from emptiness, but from a sense of anticipation. The kittens had been growing bolder. Bramble had mastered the art of climbing onto the couch. Clove proudly dragged socks across the hallway like they were trophies, and Tansy had shed her timidity, playfully nipping at anyone who passed by. Yet, beneath the lively antics, an unspoken stillness lingered. It felt as though they were all aware that something significant was on the horizon. That Saturday, without any prior arrangement on my part, the shelter van unexpectedly arrived. A friendly woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, and a small carrier tucked under her arm. She approached the porch cautiously, as if gauging whether she was truly welcome. I couldn't let her wait for the knock on the door, so I stepped outside first. Behind me, Jasper's gentle voice floated through the window, reading to the kittens, his sketchbook rustling softly. I didn't confirm anything, I admitted, my voice quieter than I anticipated. "I know," she said, the warmth in her tone evident. "We just hoped." When she offered me the carrier, I hesitated to take it. Inside the house, Clove let out a sharp, sudden meow, clear and almost defiant. His bright eyes were fixed on me, perched proudly on the arm of the couch. Later that evening, Moira visited. She sipped her tea in silence for a while before breaking the quiet. "You're making a choice that will stay with you. It's not about what's easy, but about something deeper you've seen in them, and in yourself, that won't let you walk away," she stated matter-of-factly. I found my gaze drifting back to the kittens. Clove still watched the door as if he was keeping vigil, waiting for something or someone. It dawned on me then that this moment had grown beyond the simple task of saving them. It was evolving into something none of us had originally planned, a home. After all, home is often the place we find difficult to leave behind. That day, as Jasper prepared for the inevitable change, we both knew we had to figure out a way forward that worked for all of us. With the community board flyer he had shared earlier, we had a chance to make this transition happen on our own terms. The moment was quiet, almost serene. As I knelt by the back door, I spotted her at the far edge of the yard, Fern. She looked fragile, weathered by the world, yet unmistakably herself. We locked eyes, and for a brief instant, it felt like time stood still. Everything that had led to this moment, the fear, the rescue, the uncertainty, seemed to converge right there between us. I didn't rush to call her. Instead, I remained still, letting the silence hang in the air. I could sense that this wasn't just about her return. It was about understanding the bond we had gradually formed. She approached cautiously, one paw moving forward at a time, and in that action, I felt an unspoken connection, a promise of something new. As I turned away from the door, my heart felt heavy yet hopeful. Clove had already made his way to me, curling his tail around my ankle. Bramble followed, almost tripping over a stray slipper, while Tansy and Moss watched from a distance, their heads tilted, seemingly waiting for me to take the lead. I dropped to my knees, surrounded by them, remembering our first night together. Panic had filled the air then, as I fumbled through my new role. Now there was a kind of calm amongst us. Just before Fern appeared, I had made a decision. Standing by the door, I had thought of the love that had blossomed in that house I hadn't known I was building. Those moments spent watching over my new companions weren't merely about adoption paperwork. They were profound, life-changing experiences. Each night spent together had slowly tied us into a family, one that had chosen each other without formalities. The shelter van had left moments before, its tires crunching on gravel as it disappeared down the winding path toward the sea. I had shut the door before any goodbyes were uttered, not out of rudeness, but because I could feel my voice faltering beneath the weight of the moment. Inside the house, life continued, tiny feet shifting against the floorboards, each sound a reminder of the new life we were building together. Now, as I watched Fern approach, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. This wasn't just an ending or another rescue story. It was the unanticipated beginning of a family that had taken shape quietly, without force. Fern didn't leap into my arms. Instead, she stepped forward deliberately. There was no fanfare, no dramatic reunion, just a subtle understanding that this was a journey we would take together, and it was worth every moment of waiting. The kittens had created their own little universe in our home. Each day, they grew more distinct, revealing their personalities, quirks, and the habits that made them feel truly unique. I found comfort in their soft purring and enjoyed the warmth of their tiny bodies nestled beside me. I often watched them from the kitchen window, marveling at the quick bursts of energy as they dashed around. Fern's visits were more unpredictable. She would appear at odd hours, just long enough to remind me of the connection we shared, yet never staying for long. It felt as though she frequented our home as if waiting for me to realize something important. Despite her cautious demeanor, there was an unmistakable softness in her eyes, a sign of the bond that had formed between us over time. As the weeks unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that my decision was still hanging in the air. The affection I received from both Fern and the kittens was more profound than I had anticipated. Standing by the window, I'd occasionally wonder about the future. Could I truly provide a stable home for all of them? Would I end up pondering those questions again at the door, trying to navigate the next chapter of our lives together? For the moment, though, everything felt fine. There was no urgency to find answers. The weight of their little lives added to the comfort of our shared journey. It became clear that this rescue wasn't merely something I was doing for them. It was a collective experience we had embraced. A family had formed in unexpected ways, and the bond we created didn't require any words to define it. When Fern finally returned to the yard, it wasn't a grand moment filled with excitement. Rather, it was a gentle reminder of patience and understanding. She approached slowly, keeping her distance, but the depth in her gaze told me that our connection was evolving. In that quiet moment, as her paw touched the step, it felt like she was reclaiming a part of our story, not out of necessity, but out of a shared history that we both valued. Fern often appeared in the yard at unusual hours, just enough to keep our connection alive, yet she never lingered for long. As time went on, I found myself torn about my decisions. The love I received came unexpectedly, from the kittens and from Fern as well. I would sometimes stand by the kitchen window, observing them and contemplating our future together. Could I truly care for them all? Would it be sufficient? Or would I eventually find myself at the door again, trying to make sense of a new chapter that had quietly started without my attention? For now, there was no urgency and no need to rush for answers. I felt the weight of their tiny lives, and I found comfort in knowing the rescue work had evolved into something we created together. A family formed in surprising ways, and a bond that spoke volumes without needing words. What does home mean to you? If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made similar choices? And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Click the bell icon to stay updated on our latest adventures, and share this narrative with anyone who might need a bit of hope today. Thank you for joining us.